Well, thanks for welcoming you to our vineyard here. This is a property that I purchased with my wife back in 2005. The original blocks run north-south that you've come in past on the bus, and this particular block, Riesling block, we planted in 2006. So I think it really suits the site. East-west rows on an eastern aspect suits it really well. So it's obviously been a challenging season so far, and probably maybe one or two more challenges to come depending on what the weather throws at us in the next couple of weeks. But I really like what's happening with the weather in the next sort of 10 days. If we can get another couple of weeks like that, we could have a really good vintage. So the heat knocked them around a little bit last week, a little bit of sort of tired leaf on the western side, and then we had 3.5 mils of rain, which was good to break that heat up on Saturday morning. So I guess my philosophy for growing Riesling is just trying to keep them as healthy as possible. So we do everything we possibly can to keep the canopy over the fruit. That's why we've got VSP, and I like to see growing tips pretty much all the way through to the end of the growing season with our whites, to make sure they're healthy and happy. And when they're like that, we produce flavour pretty much straight after veraison. That flavour development is there straight away, and as you would have tasted this morning, there's already flavour in there at 9 Beaumet. So another couple of Beaumet ripeness and we'll have ample flavour for harvest. We don't have to add acid here. In some years actually you have to take some out because the acidity is too high. But we've got 3 clones on the property. This is 198. The north-south, the original block is 239. And the young block over there is 110, so it'll be interesting to see how they all fall out when they're up and established, especially the new block. I encourage, we're really working well with clovers. That's sort of what I want to have in my mid-rows. I like it because it's low growing, so when we mow it come frost time at bud burst, it continues to grow, and then it grows quite strongly in that spring period, and we end up with like a mulch mat. We've had some really good results with some of the native things that have been growing on here, some subterranean clovers, but I also planted some crimson clover in the young block this year, which did really well. So really trying to outcompete those summer weeds before they come up, especially wireweed. But as you can see through there, there's a few weeds, but not too bad for this time of year. We're on a 4-year straw rotational mulch for our whites. Really good for maintaining that moisture in the soil early in the season, so we get a good strong canopy of, and obviously for your weed suppression and also keeping your soil cool later in the year. It obviously costs a bit, but it reduces the amount of water I need to use, and also reduces the amount of anything I need to do with weed suppression. So this Riesling blocks all they've had one herbicide undervine spray for the whole year, that's it. And the red blocks have had nothing. They're undervine mechanical weeded and just mowed out mid-rows. So I guess I'm big on the canopy and how it looks come this time of year. So what I do is lift the lift wires come that time, and this year with being such a vigorous year, and I was a bit conscious early on that we could have some shoots that would break, so I did it at a really early lift, which I don't normally do, to stop any of those shoots that break. You know, when the canes get that, they're sort of a bit fragile when they're young. So I did an early lift, and then I lifted them into position where they needed to be, where they normally sit, and then they continue to grow, so I did a higher lift, and conscious of the cool wet year, we actually went probably a little bit higher with our canopy this year, with the view that it will help ripening on the back end. The heat sort of maybe changed where we should have sat, but maybe put them a little bit more under stress in the last week, but I think they've got through relatively well. To this point in time, the blocks had about 0.5 mega hectare of water, and it probably averages about 0.6 mega hectare year in, year out, depending on the vintage. Reds are a lot less than that. And what I'm looking for come picking decision is trying to get the acidity to a point where the sugar and flavour is ripe enough, and we tend to pick on the early side, so we'll sort of aim to pick sort of 11.2-ish, and with our super good yeast converting the sugar into alcohol, we end up with sort of 11.6 to 11.8% alcohol. That's sort of where we finish. So that gives you a rundown of what we do. So I guess we are quite elevated. Mount Horrocks is the little, follow the ridge line, there's a little tip up on the end. So that's obviously the highest point in Clare. We're sitting about 475 metres above sea level, and annual rainfall's 652, and this year we had 955. So well up with rain leading into the growing season, but it generally gets 4 inches more than what Clare does every year consistently. I didn't actually see what Clare had last year. So.
Steve, what acids are you aiming for when you're going for that bone?
They normally come in around 9 to 10, and then they'll drop a little bit out during cold stability, and hopefully they finish around sort of the 8-ish. But saying that, last year finished in the 9, so we took a little bit of acid out because it was just too searing. So.
What sort of sugar are you balancing that with, Steve?
We look for it sort of somewhere between 2.5 to 3 grams. We think that little bit of sugar adds will help the wines when they age, and with the alcohol being lower, that adds that little bit of richness to the palate too. Come, Matt, you must have a question.
I'm thinking why you made us walk up here instead of driving up here.
I was actually surprised the bus got over the hill so well. The driveway isn't great.
So Steve, do you have any sheet sitting, bunk sitting in your Riesling, mate?
Yeah, well, with the wet year, I actually shoot thinned early the southern part of the block, and then after the lift in the northern part of the block, I go through and take all those small shoots out that are carrying those sort of 1 or 2 bunches. They pop out the canopy really easy. They're easy to see, and they're unlignified. I don't think they add anything to the wine, so I think that's good for not only the quality of the fruit that year, but also good for your vine health pushing down, because you're not making that pruning cut later in the year. You're taking out when it's an unlignified shoot. I have been conscious of shoot thinning early with Riesling because you can open yourself up a little bit, but being a cooler, wetter year, I decided to do half the block. Be interesting to see what others do around the valley. It's better to do it early, but then you sort of don't know how the season's going to pan out. So the plans change probably 3 or 4 times during the year on how the season's running. So, and it still might change again.
So you give these a bit of fert through drippers or foliar?
No, the only fert that they get a composted cow manure when the straw goes down to try to compensate for that uptake of nitrogen when the straw is there, and that's all they get. We're trying to encourage sort of like that clover, the nitrogen fixing clover to add back to the soil, but yeah, no fert, no foliar.
Steve, what about your thoughts on pruning methods? I know you sort of do different things for your different varieties and different blocks.
I really like the spur for Riesling and Clare, but being a bit more respectful of the cuts, letting them sort of grow into their space. Whereas 10 years ago it would have been electric snips and just trying to have your spur positions in the right spots, whereas now I'm sort of all hand snips and not making big cuts. Riesling doesn't get as much affected by Eutypa as what Reds do. As you can see, the trunks are obviously quite still thin, the vines stay healthy, and they continue to be healthy for a longer period of time. Like 20-year-old Reds this time would be showing plenty of Eutypa in the trunk. We do a lot of cane pruning as well. I've got my Shiraz at the front on canes, but with cane pruning in Clare, I just find the fruit hangs out the bottom of the canopy too much. Really encouraged for reds, but not so for whites. So we get more light into the fruit, which we don't want. We want to have that fruit sort of hidden into that canopy. So really trying to make sure that our leaf stays healthy. But we're pruning to a baby sort of 32 to 36 buds, and the block probably averages somewhere between 9 to 11 tonne a hectare every year. And what I've seen from vines that are under stress, we'll end up with the yield being lower. When you go, well, generally you get better, or the talk is you get better fruit from lower yielding vines, but that's not necessarily the case, because that vine's under stress, it doesn't produce flavour, and over time that vine's not going to be healthy. So really good example is that on that bottom corner of that north-south block, some years the end vines get affected by those ash trees down there, and you can go and walk and taste those vines on the end, and the berries are just like acid water, no flavour at all. And then you walk a panel up and you find a healthy vine, and it's just an explosion of flavour. So really concentrating on trying to keep that canopy as healthy as possible and develop flavour early, so we can pick whenever we want. We're not forced to wait for flavour to come in, because it's there already.
Any more comments or questions?
Do you have any issues with botrytis in wet years like this year?
Yes. Yeah, so there's a little bit of split from that rain. So we're just conscious of, if we got another rain, I reckon it might be, it could turn to a lot more botrytis. So we probably see it more in the north-south block, where I try to encourage a little bit more foliage on the western side. We see that more there, and if we do see anything that looks like it might want to go, we cut it off early. But it can fester. But I think we've had 7 sprays this year. Some years we only put 3 fungicide sprays on and get through fine. Those wetter years you've got to be a little bit more conscious of your fruit load and what you're trying to get through to the end. So fingers crossed for 3 weeks of good weather.
What sort of chemicals do you have in your arsenal when you put fungicide spray?
We're not organic, but we'll just go with what we need to at the time.
You don't think you're not too much off the sides?
This year, potentially. I went in with...
I was surprised there wasn't a lot of sunburn coming up the hill from the last week.
It's a little bit, probably a little bit more than normal.
Yeah.
So I used the Euro trimmer for the first time with the spinning blades. Normally I use a Pelonk with the scissors, and that is obviously tight. But where the sun sits, it's obviously just getting to the sort of over top at the moment. It'll end up on the northern side to finish.
Yeah.
But hopefully I'm keeping enough healthy leaf over that to reduce that. But when you've got a whole week of above 35 and you finish with a 38, 39, 38, it's really hard to prepare for that. So I'm glad we had enough healthy leaf cover on it. I've seen some blocks where they have been opened up and there's 10 to 15% burn. So.
All machined? Picked?
I hand pick a little bit of Shiraz.
Don't worry about Shiraz.
No. Potentially, no. I guess we're having the advantage of picking at pikes. We normally pick early in the morning, somewhere around sort of 4 to 6 we can get it in, and we just tote bin it straight over the hill, so it's a continual process. It's not sitting in bins. It just goes straight over and through the press and off skins in the space of half an hour. And I guess we extract probably somewhere around sort of 500 to 540 litres a tonne, 520 litres a tonne, depending on the year. Yeah. The dry years less, obviously the wetter years more. I guess the interesting part, the bunch weights that we've grown on both my blocks tend to be around about the 120 grams average year in, year out, whereas a lot of other blocks we take are sort of 90 to 100. So taking out those small shoots, taking out those small bunches, brings up leaving stuff that's supposed to be left. The shoots from the buds that I've actually left on my vine. So. The walk down the hill's easier than up the hill.